How many stars can you see tonight? 10? 20? Maybe 100 if you are lucky enough to live far from a city. We look up and see a few pinpricks of light in a hazy orange-tinged sky.
We see the moon.
We might see a planet or two looking just like a bright star. But that is not the sky. It is a ghost of a sky. 80% of people in North America cannot see the Milky Way. That shimmering river of light, our own galaxy seen from the inside, is gone. It has been erased by our own lights. This is a profound loss. It is a loss of connection to something our ancestors knew intimately. They lived under a different sky. A sky so dark that the Milky Way would cast a faint shadow. A sky with thousands of visible stars, not dozens. A sky that was not silent background, but an active, changing, and meaningful part of their world. It was their clock, their calendar, their map, and their book of divine secrets. They knew things about this sky that we have forgotten. Not because they were smarter, but because they had to be. Their survival and their sense of place in the universe depended on it. We have outsourced our sense of direction to a GPS. We have outsourced our timekeeping to an atomic clock. We have outsourced our wonder to documentaries. What did they actually see when they looked up? What did they believe about those lights in the dark? And what practical, ingenious secrets did they use to read the celestial story every single night? We think of the medieval period as the Dark Ages, a time of superstition and ignorance. But when it came to the night sky, they were living in an age of incredible light. We are the ones in the dark. Number 15 was the universe talking to them. We live in a silent universe. That is the modern view. It is vast, empty, and indifferent. It is governed by physical laws that are blind and purposeless. The Big Bang happened. These stars formed. Planets coalesced. Life arose by chance. It is an amazing story, but it is not a story written for us. The universe is not trying to tell us anything. It just is. This would have been a deeply alien idea to someone in the medieval period. For them, the universe was anything but silent. It was shouting. Every star, every planet, every comet was a word in a divine sentence. Their universe had a purpose, and that purpose was centered on humanity. This worldview was not born from ignorance. It was a sophisticated philosophical system inherited from the ancient Greeks, particularly Aristotle and Ptolemy, and then integrated into Christian theology by thinkers like Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. The core idea was teleology. This is the belief that everything has an end, a goal, a purpose. A seed's purpose is to become a tree. A knife's purpose is to cut. The purpose of the cosmos, they believed, was to be a home for humanity and a stage for the drama of salvation. So, when a medieval person looked up at the stars, they were not seeing random balls of gas billions of miles away. They were seeing the outer layers of their own home. They saw a perfectly ordered, God-given machine designed to provide light, mark time, and reveal the Creator's plan. The sun was not just a star, it was the lamp for the day. The moon was the lamp for the night. Steady, predictable movement of the heavens was a sign of God's unchanging perfection, a stark contrast to the messy, chaotic world below. This belief shaped every observation. Astronomy was not the study of space, it was the study of God's creation. Understanding the motions of the planets was a way of understanding the mind of God. This is why the church, contrary to popular myth, was often a major patron of astronomy. Monks in monasteries, like the English Benedictine monk Walter of Malvern, were some of the most dedicated observers of the 11th century. They needed to calculate the date of Easter, which is a complex astronomical problem. But on a deeper level, they were deciphering the divine timetable. This view made the sky deeply personal. If a new star, a nova, suddenly appeared, it was not just a fascinating astrophysical event. It was a message, a sign, an omen. When a comet blazed across the sky, as Halley's Comet did before the Battle of Hastings in 1066, it was seen by all as a portent of doom for the English king. The Bayeux's Tapestry, which tells the story of the Norman conquest, even depicts the comet with frightened people pointing at it. They did not ask, what is it made of? They asked, what does it mean for us? The entire structure of the universe was a moral lesson. The Earth, home to flawed humanity, was at the center. It was corrupt and changing. Above it, the heavens were perfect, eternal, and unchanging. And to look up was to look toward perfection, toward God. This idea permeates medieval art, literature, and music. Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in the early 14th century, is a journey through this very cosmos, from the depths of the central earth up through the celestial spheres to the presence of God. We have lost this. Our universe is bigger, older, and stranger than they could have imagined. But it is also mute. It does not offer us moral guidance or a sense of ultimate purpose. We have gained immense knowledge, but we have forgotten the secret of living in a cosmos that speaks. But did their talking universe make them more secure or more anxious? If every comet is a potential message of doom, is that a comforting world to live in? And by insisting the universe had a purpose centered on us, did they blind themselves to its true scale and nature for centuries? What secrets is our silent universe telling us that we are still not ready to hear? Number 14. Did they think they lived inside a snow globe? Imagine holding a glass snow globe. In the center is a tiny model of a town. Around it, fixed to the glass, are painted snowflakes. You can shake it and watch the fake snow swirl, but the painted flakes on the sphere itself never move. In a way, this is how a medieval person understood the universe. We think of space as a vacuum, an endless black emptiness in which things float. This concept did not exist for them. Their universe was full. It was a series of nested, solid, transparent spheres. Think of it like a Russian doll, but with the Earth at the very center instead of the smallest doll. This model was the masterpiece of the Greco-Roman astronomer Claudius Ptolemy, who lived in the 2nd century AD. His book, the Almagest, was the undisputed textbook of astronomy for over 1,400 years. It was translated from Greek into Arabic in the 9th century, and then from Arabic into Latin in the 12th century, becoming the foundation of medieval European astronomy. The system he described was complex, ingenious, and it worked. It could predict the positions of the planets with remarkable accuracy for the time. Here's how it was structured. At the very center was the stationary Earth. It did not move. It did not rotate. Everything went around it. The first sphere, the one closest to us, carried the moon. The next one carried Mercury, then Venus, then the Sun, then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. That was it. Those were the 7 wanderers, or planets. The word planet comes from the Greek for wanderer. Beyond the sphere of Saturn was the most important one of all the sphere of the fixed stars. This was the outer wall of the universe, the glass of the snow globe. All the stars, Orion, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, were thought to be attached to this single vast sphere, which rotated around the Earth once every day. This explained why the constellations never changed their shape. They were fixed in place. These spheres were not just a mathematical idea, they were believed to be physically real. They were made of a perfect, transparent fifth element called aether or quintessence. They were crystalline, they were solid. As they rotated, it was believed they produced a beautiful, divine sound, the music of the spheres. We could not hear it, not because it was not there, but because we had been hearing it since birth and had tuned it out. It was the background music of creation. This model explained so much of what they saw. It explained the daily rising and setting of the sun, moon, and stars. It explained why the planets seemed to wander against the fixed background of stars. To account for the strange retrograde motion of planets like Mars, where it appears to move backward in the sky, Ptolemy introduced smaller circles called epicycles, where the planet would spin on a small circle while the center of that circle moved along its main sphere. It was complicated, a bit like a celestial gear system, but it fit the observations. Living in this universe would feel very different. It was cozy, it was contained. There was no outside. Beyond the sphere of the fixed stars was not more space, but the realm of God, the empyrean heaven. The universe had a boundary. It had an edge. It was a finite, knowable place. This profound secret we have forgotten. The feeling of living in a full, enclosed, and structured cosmos. Our universe is boundless, formless, and mostly empty. It inspires a sense of awe, but also perhaps a sense of agoraphobia. Theirs inspired a sense of order and security. Everything had its proper place in the great celestial machine. Of course, we know now that this model is wrong. The Earth moves. The stars are suns, unimaginably far away. Space is a vacuum. But for over a millennium, the crystalline spheres were not a theory, they were reality. So, if their model felt so complete and real to them, how can we be sure our current models of dark matter and dark energy are not just more sophisticated epicycles, designed to save a theory that is fundamentally flawed? What invisible structures do we believe in today that a future civilization will see as our own version of crystalline spheres? Did their contained universe make them feel more significant, or did it make them feel trapped? Number 13. Was this the world's first smartphone? We carry a device in our pockets that can tell us the time, our location, the date, and 100 other things. It connects us to a global network of information. It feels utterly modern. But what if I told you that a medieval scholar had a device that could do a surprising number of those things, all without batteries or a data plan? It was called the astrolabe, and it was less a single instrument and more a handheld analog computer. It was the astronomical multi-tool of the medieval world, and its elegance and utility are something we have almost completely forgotten. An astrolabe looks like a large, ornate pocket watch made of brass. It is a disc, usually a few inches across, with intricate markings and moving parts. To a modern eye, it seems like a mysterious piece of art or a navigational relic. But to a user in the 13th century, it was a practical tool for daily life and scholarly work. Its history is ancient, with its principles known to the Greeks, but it was perfected in the Islamic Golden Age. Astronomers like al-Zarqali in 11th century Islamic Spain created incredibly precise and beautiful astrolabes. These instruments, along with the knowledge of how to use them, flowed into Europe, especially through Spain and Sicily. The first detailed European text on how to build and use one was written in English by the poet Geoffrey Chaucer in the 1390s, titled A Treatise on the Astrolabe for his 10-year-old son, Louis. So what could it do? Its primary function was to model the sky. The main plate, the mater, held a series of interchangeable plates, each engraved with a map of the sky as seen from a specific latitude. Over this was a skeletal-looking disc called the rete, which had pointers indicating the positions of the brightest stars. With these parts, you could solve dozens of problems. First, you could tell time. At night, you would hold up the astrolabe, sight a specific star through the alidade, a rotating ruler on the back, and note its altitude, its height above the horizon. Then you would rotate the rete on the front to match that position. A rule on the astrolabe would then point to the current time on a 24-hour scale. It was a star clock. During the day, you could do the same thing with the sun without looking directly at it, of course. It was often more accurate than the mechanical clocks of the era. Second, it was a calendar and almanac. You could use it to find the exact time of sunrise and sunset for any day of the year. You could track the sun's position along the ecliptic, the path it takes through the zodiacal constellations over the year. This was vital for knowing the seasons, for agriculture, and for calculating religious festival dates. Third, it had practical uses on the ground. By measuring the angle to the top of a building or a mountain, and then measuring your distance to its base, you could use simple trigonometry often engraved on the back of the astrolabe to calculate its height. It was a tool for surveyors. While it was a good tool for determining latitude, it was not the primary tool for navigation at sea. The marine astrolabe was a much simpler, heavier version designed for use on a rocking ship. The classical astrolabe was more of a scholar's and land traveler's tool. To use an astrolabe was to have a deep, physical connection to the cosmos. You were not just reading a number off a screen. You were physically aligning a model of the universe in your hands with the actual universe above you. It forced you to learn the names of the stars, to recognize their positions, and to understand the fundamental motions of the sky. It was a hands-on education in astronomy. We have forgotten this tactile knowledge. We get our information abstractly through digital interfaces. The astrolabe represents a way of knowing that is embedded in the physical world. It was a secret because it was not just a device. It was a way of thinking, a way of seeing your place in an ordered, predictable, and measurable cosmos. When we rely on a black box like a smartphone to tell us where we are, what skills do we let atrophy? If a simple brass computer could model the universe, does that mean their universe was simpler, or that their minds were more adept at understanding systems? Could the loss of physical tools like the astrolabe be partly responsible for our modern disconnect from the natural world? At number 12, how did they read a book written in another language? We think of science as a smooth, forward march, a continuous accumulation of knowledge. But that is not how it works. Knowledge is often lost, forgotten, and then rediscovered. From medieval Europe, much of the astronomical knowledge of the ancient Greeks, like Ptolemy's work, had been lost or was inaccessible after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The texts were gone, and few in the Latin West could read Greek anyway. So, how did the scientific revival of the High Middle Ages happen? It happened through translation. This is one of the most important and overlooked secrets of medieval stargazing. European astronomy did not spring from nothing. It was a direct inheritance from the Islamic world, which had preserved, commented on, and vastly improved upon the Greek astronomical tradition. During Europe's Dark Ages, the Islamic world was experiencing a golden age of science from the 8th to the 13th centuries. The rulers in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba built great libraries and observatories. Well, they were hungry for knowledge. They sponsored massive projects to translate scientific and philosophical works from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic. They did not just preserve the old knowledge, they built on it. Astronomers like al-Battani in the 10th century made more accurate observations of the sun's path and the length of the year than Ptolemy had. Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi, in his 10th century Book of Fixed Stars, created a magnificent star catalog that updated Ptolemy's, including the first recorded observation of a galaxy outside our own, the Andromeda Galaxy, which he described as a small cloud. These were just two of hundreds of brilliant scholars. For centuries, this vast body of knowledge was largely unknown in Christian Europe. The secret to unlocking it was in a few specific places where cultures met, most notably in Spain. After the Christian reconquest of the city of Toledo from the Moors in 1085, Western scholars found a treasure trove. Toledo's libraries were filled with Arabic books on medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. Starting in the 12th century, a great translation movement began in Toledo from scholars from all over Europe, like Gerard of Cremona from Italy and Robert of Chester from England flocked to the city. They worked with local Mozarabic Christians and Jews who were bilingual in Arabic and the local Romance dialect. It was a massive collaborative effort. Imagine sitting down with a text as complex as Ptolemy's Almagest in Arabic, having a local scholar translate it orally into a Spanish dialect, and then you, the Latin scholar, writing it down in Latin, the language of European scholarship. It was slow, painstaking work, but it changed everything. Suddenly, the core texts of Greek science and the advanced commentaries of Islamic astronomers were available to a Latin-speaking audience. The astrolabe became widespread. The so-called Arabic numerals we use today, which actually originated in India, replaced clumsy Roman numerals, making calculation vastly easier. Terms we still use in astronomy today are fossils of this transmission. Stars like Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, and Rigel all have Arabic names. Words like azimuth, zenith, and algebra are all derived from Arabic. This was not a passive reception of knowledge. European thinkers engaged with it, debated it, and eventually started to build upon it themselves. By the 13th century, universities were being founded across Europe, in places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, and this newly translated material formed the core of their scientific curriculum. In figures like Roger Bacon, a 13th century Franciscan friar, were calling for new observations and experiments, inspired by the scientific tradition they had just inherited. We have forgotten how interconnected the medieval world was. We imagine it as a time of isolated castles and warring kingdoms, but there was a vibrant international exchange of ideas. The secret is that medieval science was multicultural. It was a conversation that spanned centuries, languages, and religions. The stargazing of a monk in England was made possible by the work of a scholar in Baghdad, who was in turn building on the work of an ancient Greek in Alexandria. Does this history challenge our neat divisions between East and West, or Christianity and Islam? If the foundations of the European scientific renaissance were built on translations, what crucial knowledge might we be ignoring today simply because it is in a different language or from a different culture? What modern Toledos, places of cultural and intellectual exchange, do we need to nurture today? Number 11 was the church at war with the stars. The popular story is simple. The medieval church was a force of darkness and superstition. It suppressed science, burned books, and persecuted anyone who dared to look at the sky with an open mind. The lone astronomer, a proto-Galileo, had to work in secret, fearing the wrath of the Inquisition. It is a powerful narrative of reason versus faith, and it is mostly wrong. The relationship between the church and astronomy in the Middle Ages was far more complex and often more supportive than we remember. This is a crucial forgotten secret. The church was not the enemy of astronomy for much of the period. It was the primary sponsor and preserver of it. Let's start with the basics. Why would the church be interested in the stars at all? One very practical reason was timekeeping. The Christian calendar is full of movable feasts, the most important of which is Easter. The date of Easter depends on the moon and the sun. It falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon or after the vernal equinox. Calculating this date in advance, the practice known as computus, required a sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles. Monks were the timekeepers of society, and their monasteries were the centers of this kind of learning. Bede, an English monk from the 8th century, wrote a hugely influential book called The Reckoning of Time. It was a technical manual on calendar calculations, but it also contained a wealth of astronomical knowledge, describing the Earth as a sphere and explaining the causes of tides. This was not suppressed. It was a medieval bestseller, copied and studied in monasteries all over Europe for centuries. Furthermore, the worldview we discussed earlier, the universe as God's creation, meant that studying astronomy was a form of worship. To understand the heavens was to appreciate the genius of the Creator. It was a pious activity. This is why many cathedrals, the grandest expressions of medieval faith, were designed as giant astronomical instruments. Many had a small hole in the roof, a gnomon, that would project an image of the sun onto a meridian line on the floor. By marking the sun's position along this line each day, they could determine the length of the year and the exact date of the solstices and equinoxes with incredible precision. The Cathedral of Florence and the Basilica of San Petronio in Bologna still have these solar observatories built into their very structure. Of course, there was a line that could not be crossed. That line was astrology, but not in the way we think. The church's main objection was to a specific kind of astrology, fatalistic astrology. This was the belief that the stars controlled human destiny, negating free will. If your fate was written in the stars, then the church's teachings on sin, repentance, and salvation were meaningless. This was a theological problem. However, a more general kind of astrology, which saw the stars as influences rather than controllers, was widely accepted. It was believed that the planets could influence the weather, the growth of crops, and the balance of humors in the human body, which we will get to later. This was seen as part of the natural order God had created. There were certainly conflicts. Certain ideas from Aristotle, when they were reintroduced in the 13th century, caused major debates at the University of Paris because they seemed to contradict Christian doctrine. But these were academic disputes among theologians, not a war on science itself. The story of Galileo's conflict with the church happened in the 17th century, at the tail end of the Renaissance, and its circumstances were very different from the medieval period. We have forgotten that institutions are not monoliths. The church was made up of thousands of individuals. There were popes who were fascinated by astronomy, like Sylvester II, who was a great scholar in the 10th century and helped popularize Arabic knowledge. There were also dogmatic figures who were suspicious of pagan learning, but the dominant trend in the High Middle Ages was one of synthesis, of trying to integrate this new scientific knowledge with Christian faith. So, if the church was not the simple villain of the story, does that force us to rethink the relationship between science and religion entirely? What happens to our idea of progress if the Dark Ages were not so dark after all? And could the medieval attempt to find harmony between faith and reason hold any lessons for our own, often polarized world? Number 10, were the stars a clock or a calendar? The answer is yes, they were both, and for most people they were more reliable and more important than any human-made device. We have so completely forgotten this secret that we can barely imagine a world without glowing numbers telling us the time to the second. But for 1,000 years, the sky was the master clock. Let's start with the calendar. For an agrarian society, knowing the seasons is not a matter of convenience, it is a matter of life and death. You need to know when to plant and when to harvest. The position of the sun provides the basic framework. The solstices, the longest and shortest days, and the equinoxes, when day and night are equal, are the 4 great pillars of the year. Medieval people knew how to track these. They could build simple structures like a sun cross, or use a local landmark, like a hill, to mark where the sun rose on these key dates. But the stars provided a much richer and more detailed calendar. Certain constellations are only visible at certain times of the year. Their appearance in the evening sky was a clear signal. The Greek poet Hesiod, writing around 700 BC, advised farmers to begin your harvest when the Pleiades, daughters of Atlas, are rising. This kind of star lore was ancient and continuous. A medieval farmer would know that when the constellation Orion, the hunter, started to dominate the winter sky, the coldest months were upon him. When the bright star Vega was high overhead in the summer evenings, it was the peak of the warm season. This was not just folk wisdom, it was codified in texts. The medieval computist tradition we mentioned earlier was all about this. Monks would create calendars that listed saints' days alongside astronomical events. They knew that the year is not a neat 365 days long. It is about 365.2425 days long. The Julian calendar, which was used throughout the medieval period, approximated this by adding a leap day every 4 years. It was a good approximation, but it was slightly off, causing the calendar to drift by about 1 day every 128 years. By the late Middle Ages, astronomers knew this and were already discussing the need for the calendar reform that would eventually happen under Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. Now for the clock. During the day, the sundial was the most common time-telling device. But what about at night? The sky offered a perfect clock if you knew how to read it. The key was the circumpolar stars. These are the stars near the celestial poles that never set below the horizon. They just appear to rotate around the pole star. In the northern hemisphere, the Big Dipper or the Plough, as it was often known in England, was the most useful star clock. It makes one full counter clockwise rotation around the North Star, Polaris, every 23 hours and 56 minutes. This is called a sidereal day. By observing the position of the two pointer stars in the Dipper's bowl relative to Polaris, you could tell the time with surprising accuracy. Imagine a giant clock face in the sky with Polaris at the center and the Big Dipper as the hour hand. A trained observer could tell the time to within 15 or 30 minutes. This skill was vital for many people. For monks who had to rise for prayers like matins in the middle of the night, knowing the time was a religious duty. The person responsible for waking the others was the horologus, the timekeeper, and he would use the stars. For sailors on watch, for soldiers standing guard, for travelers on a long journey, the star clock was essential. We have forgotten how to see the sky as a dynamic, moving system. We see it as a static picture, but for them it was a grand celestial mechanism, the most predictable and reliable process they knew. They did not just see a random pattern of dots, they saw the hands of a clock in the pages of a calendar. If we lost all our technology tomorrow, how long would it take us to relearn this skill? What does it mean for our minds and our perception of time that we no longer have to look outside ourselves to know the hour or the season? Has our reliance on precise, abstract time made us less attuned to the natural, cyclical rhythms of the world? Number 9, did the sky have a personality? When you look at a constellation, what do you see? You probably see a shape. The Big Dipper looks like a ladle. Orion's belt is a straight line of 3 stars. We might know the Greek myth associated with it. Orion was a great hunter, but it feels like a dead story, a label we memorized. For a medieval person, the sky was not just full of shapes and dead stories. It was full of characters. It had a personality, and that personality was not just Greek. It was local, Christian, and deeply personal. This is a subtle but profound secret we have forgotten. The sky was part of their culture, not just part of nature. The official, scholarly astronomy was based on the 48 classical constellations listed by Ptolemy. These are the ones we are familiar with, the figures of Greek and Roman mythology. Orion the hunter, Cassiopeia the queen, Pegasus the winged horse. Scholars and astrologers knew these stories. They were taught in the universities and appeared in manuscripts, but for the common person, the farmer or the sailor, the sky was often reimagined with more familiar figures. The constellations were Christianized. Orion's belt might be seen as the 3 magi or Jacob's staff. The northern crown was sometimes called the crown of thorns. The Milky Way was not just the galaxy, it was the way of St. James, a celestial road pointing pilgrims toward the great shrine of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. The sky also had local personalities. Different regions had their own names and stories for the stars. In parts of England, the Big Dipper was not a dipper or a plough, but Charles's wain or King Charles's wagon. These local names and stories connected the grand universal sky to the specific landscape and culture of the people looking up. The stars were not remote and alien. They were part of their world, their folklore, their identity. This personification of the sky was a way of making it understandable and memorable. It is much easier to remember the location of a star by seeing it as the eye of a bull, Aldebaran, in Taurus, than by memorizing its coordinates. It turned the sky into a giant storybook filled with heroes, villains, and epic tales. These were not just bedtime stories, they were mnemonic devices, ways of encoding and transmitting complex astronomical information from one generation to the next in a pre-literate or semi-literate society. This personified sky was also seen as directly interacting with the world. It was not a passive backdrop. Comets were hairy stars, harbingers of disaster. Meteors were shooting stars or dragon's fire, sparking fear and wonder. An eclipse was a terrifying event, a moment when the natural order was visibly disrupted. The sun, the king of the sky, was being devoured. The moon, the queen of the night, was turning to blood. These were not seen as mere alignments of celestial bodies, they were cosmic dramas with real-world implications. We have depersonalized the sky, we have stripped it of its stories. Our modern constellation names are official designations from the International Astronomical Union. We have star catalogs with numbers like HD 85,512. It is precise and scientific, but it is also sterile. We have traded myth for math. By doing this, we have lost the art of celestial storytelling, and we have forgotten that for most of human history, the sky was a canvas for the human imagination. It reflected our hopes, our fears, and our need to find meaning in the cosmos. It was a shared cultural space, not just an object of scientific inquiry. What did we lose when we stopped telling stories about the stars? Is it possible that the myths, for all their scientific inaccuracy, contained a different kind of truth about our relationship with the universe? If we were to create new constellations today, what would they be? The smartphone? The satellite? The traffic jam? Number 8 was the sky trying to kill them. Today, we see a clear line between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is a science. It studies the physical properties and motions of celestial objects. Astrology is a pseudoscience, a belief system that claims these objects influence human affairs. In the medieval world, this line did not exist. They were two sides of the same coin. This is one of the most fundamental secrets to understanding their view of the cosmos. For them, astrology was not about reading a daily horoscope in a newspaper. It was a complex and sophisticated system of knowledge, what they called natural astrology. It was based on the idea that the heavens exerted a physical influence on the sublunar world Noor, that is, everything below the sphere of the moon. This was not seen as supernatural, it was seen as nature. The sun obviously affects the earth with its light and heat. The moon obviously affects the tides. It seemed perfectly logical that the planets, the other wanderers, would also have their own subtle influences. The motivation for much of medieval astronomy was, in fact, astrology. A king or a pope would employ a court astronomer, astrologer, to help them make important decisions. To do this, the astrologer needed to know the exact position of the planets at a specific time. This required accurate astronomical tables and observations. The need for a good astrological forecast drove the science of astronomy forward. One of the most important areas of astrological practice was medicine. This was not a fringe idea, it was a core part of university-level medical education. The system was based on the idea of correspondences. The 7 planets, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 4 classical elements earth, air, fire, water, and the 4 humors of the body, black bile, blood, yellow bile, phlegm, were all interconnected in a complex web. A medical textbook from the period would contain a diagram of the zodiac man. This was an image of a human body with each part linked to a sign of the zodiac. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on, down to Pisces ruling the feet. Each planet was also thought to have a temperament. Mars was hot and dry, while Saturn was cold and dry. So how did this work in practice? A physician would diagnose an illness by determining which of the 4 humors was out of balance in the patient. A fever, for example, was an excess of yellow bile, a hot and dry humor. The physician would then consult an astronomical almanac. He needed to choose a time for treatment like bloodletting or administering an herbal remedy when the celestial influences were favorable. He would avoid treating the head when the moon was in Aries. He would not perform a bloodletting when Mars, the planet of blood and iron, was in a powerful but malevolent position. This sounds like pure superstition to us, but from their perspective, it was a holistic system. It saw the human body, the microcosm, as a reflection of the larger universe, the macrocosm. Being healthy meant being in harmony with the cosmos. Illness was a form of cosmic disharmony. Medical thinkers like Hildegard of Bingen, a brilliant 12th century abbess, wrote extensively about the connections between the created world, the human body, and divine health. Beyond medicine, astrology was used for weather prediction, astrometeorology, for determining the best time to plant crops, and for electional astrology, which meant choosing the most auspicious moment to start a journey, fight a battle, or get married. We have completely rejected this worldview. We see the planets as inert balls of rock and gas that have no influence on our individual lives beyond a tiny gravitational pull. We have separated the sky from our bodies, our health, and our daily decisions. The secret we have forgotten is not that astrology is true, but that for 1,000 years it provided a powerful framework for connecting human life to the cosmos. It made the universe feel relevant, and it gave people a sense of agency, a way to navigate the forces they believed were shaping their lives. But did this constant search for favorable signs lead to a life of perpetual anxiety? If you believe the sky is actively influencing your health and fortune, can you ever truly feel free? And by medicalizing the stars, did they prevent themselves from discovering the true biological causes of disease for centuries? Number 7, were they lost without a compass? We imagine medieval navigation as a desperate affair, a lone ship on a vast ocean, with the sailors praying they would find land. We think of the magnetic compass as the magic key that unlocked the age of discovery. The compass was certainly important, but its adoption in Europe was slow, starting around the 12th century. For centuries before and even after, sailors navigated by using a much older and more reliable tool, the stars. The secret of medieval stargazing for navigation is that it was a robust, multi-layered skill. It was not about one single trick. It was a deep, practical knowledge of the entire celestial sphere. The cornerstone of Northern Hemisphere navigation was, of course, Polaris, the North Star. What made Polaris special is its position. It sits almost directly above the Earth's North Pole. This means that as the Earth rotates, Polaris appears to stand still, while all the other stars circle around it. This gives you a fixed point in the sky. If you are facing Polaris, you are facing north. The other directions are then easy to find. More importantly, the altitude of Polaris above the horizon is almost exactly equal to your latitude. If you are at the North Pole 90 degrees latitude, Polaris is directly overhead 90 degrees altitude. If you are at the equator 0 degrees latitude, Polaris is right on the horizon 0 degrees altitude. A sailor could measure the height of Polaris using a simple instrument like a quadrant or a cross staff. If the star was 45 degrees above the horizon, they knew they were at 45 degrees latitude. By keeping Polaris at the same height, they could sail due east or west along a line of latitude. This was the main way sailors found their way across open seas like the Atlantic. But what if it was cloudy and you could not see Polaris? Or what if you sailed south of the equator where Polaris is no longer visible? Medieval sailors had other methods. They knew the constellations, they knew which stars rose and set at which points on the horizon. They could use the rising point of a known star as a directional marker. They also used the sun. During the day, a simple sundial or sun compass could help determine direction. At midday, the sun is at its highest point in Thesky. In the northern hemisphere, this point is always due south. The shortest shadow cast by a vertical stick will point north. They could track the sun's path across the sky to get a rough sense of east and west. The Vikings, who were incredible navigators long before the widespread use of the compass, may have used the mysterious sunstone. Sagas mention this stone, which could locate the sun even on a cloudy day. It is now believed this was likely a piece of calcite or another polarizing crystal, which can detect the direction of polarized sunlight. In the Indian Ocean, Arab and Persian sailors had mastered the monsoon winds. They used a sophisticated knowledge of the stars to navigate between Africa, India, and the East Indies. They used an instrument called a kamal, which was a simple rectangle of wood on a string with knots. By holding the string in their teeth and extending the wood, they could measure the height of a star to determine their latitude. Each knot represented the latitude of a specific port. The knowledge was passed down from master to apprentice. It was practical and learned by rote. Sailors would have rhymes and sayings to remember the stars. This was not the theoretical astronomy of the universities. This was a working class science, a matter of life and death. We have forgotten this embodied sense of direction. We trust a GPS satellite, an external authority, to tell us where we are. We no longer need to look up. A medieval sailor carried a map of the heavens in their head. The sky was not just something to look at, it was their guide. What did it feel like to have such a personal, hard-won knowledge of your place on the planet? By outsourcing our navigational sense to machines, have we lost a fundamental human skill, the way we have largely lost the skill of memorizing long poems or stories? Could you, if left in the wilderness with a clear sky, find your way home. Number 6, did a new star mean the end of the world? Our sky is stable. The stars we see tonight are the same stars our grandparents saw. The constellations are permanent fixtures. The only things that change are the slow wandering of the planets, the monthly cycle of the moon, and the occasional meteor. It is a predictable, reliable, and frankly somewhat boring sky. The medieval sky was not like this. It was a place where terrifying and dramatic events could happen without warning. And when they did, it was never seen as a mere curiosity. It was a message, an omen, a disruption of the divine order. This is a secret that highlights the deep psychological difference between their cosmos and ours. Their sky was alive and sometimes angry. The most dramatic events were comets, novae, and supernovae. In the perfect, unchanging heavens of the Ptolemaic model, anything new was a violation. Since the spheres of the planets and stars were supposed to be perfect and eternal, these new stars were thought to be atmospheric phenomena, happening in the upper air below the sphere of the moon. But that did not make them any less significant. Comets were particularly terrifying. They were not seen as icy bodies from the outer solar system. They were seen as exhalations from the Earth that had risen and caught fire in the upper atmosphere. Their long, flowing tails looked like hair, which is where the name comes from. The Greek cometes means long-haired. They were almost universally seen as bad omens, portents of plague, famine, war, or the death of a king. As we mentioned, the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1066 was directly linked to the death of King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. The historian William of Malmesbury wrote that it was a comet portending change in kingdoms. Then there were the guest stars. These were stars that suddenly appeared where none had been before, shone brightly for a few weeks or months, and then faded away. Today, we know these are novae or supernovae, exploding stars. For them, it was another profound sign from God. The most famous of these events occurred on July 4th, 1054. Chinese astronomers in the Song dynasty recorded the appearance of a guest star in the constellation of Taurus. They noted it was so bright, it was visible during the daytime for 23 days and at night for almost 2 years. We also have records of the event from Japanese and Arab astronomers. This was the supernova explosion that created the Crab Nebula, which we can still see today with the telescope. Interestingly, there are very few clear records of this massive celestial event from Europe. Why? It is a historical mystery. It is possible the records were lost. It is also possible that because their cosmology insisted the heavens were unchanging, they were philosophically blinded and explained it away as something else. Some scholars have found possible depictions of it in Native American rock art in the American Southwest. Eclipses were another source of terror. While learned astronomers could predict solar and lunar eclipses with some accuracy, for the general populace, they were shocking events. A solar eclipse, when the moon blocks the sun, plunged the world into an eerie daytime darkness. Birds would stop singing, the temperature would drop. It was easy to see why it was interpreted as a sign of divine anger. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a history of early England, is filled with entries that link eclipses to subsequent famines and disasters. We have forgotten the sky's capacity to be terrifying. We know what these events are. We can predict them. We watch a meteor shower for fun. An eclipse is an occasion for a viewing party. We have stripped these events of their mythological power and replaced it with scientific understanding. But in doing so, we have lost the sense of awe and fear that our ancestors felt when the heavens themselves seemed to break. Did their view of the sky as an active and sometimes menacing entity make them more humble about humanity's place in the universe? Is our sense of cosmic security just an illusion based on the fact that we have not had a major celestial event like a nearby supernova in our modern scientific history? What would we do if a new star appeared in the sky tomorrow? Number 5, did they see the weather in the moon? We get our weather forecasts from satellites, complex computer models, and Doppler radar. We can know with reasonable certainty if it will rain in 3 days' time. A medieval farmer or sailor had none of these tools. Their forecast came from a much closer source, the sky itself, and their own careful generational observation of its patterns. This folk meteorology, a forgotten science of signs and correlations, was a crucial survival skill. Astrometeorology was the more scholarly end of this practice. It was the belief that the positions of the planets influenced the weather on Earth. And almanacs would contain predictions for the year based on planetary conjunctions and oppositions. A conjunction of the cold planet Saturn and the moist planet Jupiter might be predicted to bring a cold, wet winter. While this sounds like astrology to us, it was an attempt to create a predictive system based on the idea of cosmic influence. But for most people, weather forecasting was more about reading the immediate signs in the sky. They were expert observers of the clouds, the wind, and the sun and moon. Many of the sayings that have survived as folk wisdom are remnants of this lost art. Red sky at night, sailors' delight. Red sky in morning, sailors' warning. This is not just a rhyme, it has a basis in science. A red sky is caused by sunlight scattering off dust particles in the atmosphere. In the mid-latitudes, weather systems generally move from west to east. A red sky at sunset means there is dry, dusty air to the west, so good weather is likely on its way. A red sky at sunrise means the dry air has already passed, and a low-pressure system with moisture may be following it. The moon was a particularly important weather indicator. A ring around the moon or a lunar halo was a strong predictor of approaching rain or snow. This is because the halo is created by moonlight refracting through ice crystals in high-altitude cirrus clouds. These clouds often precede a warm front and its associated storm system, so the halo was a reliable sign that the weather was about to change. The clarity of the sky was another clue. If the stars seemed to twinkle more than usual, it was a sign of turbulence in the atmosphere, which could mean an approaching storm. If the Milky Way appeared unusually bright and clear, it was a sign of very dry, stable air and continued good weather. They also watched animal behavior, birds flying low, cows lying down in a field. These were all interpreted as signs of impending rain. Again, with some basis, in fact, animals are sensitive to changes in air pressure. This knowledge was a science of patterns, not of causes. They did not know about air pressure, warm fronts, or atmospheric physics. But they knew that when A happened, B often followed. It was a vast crowdsourced database of observations refined over centuries and passed down through generations. It was specific to the local climate and landscape. The weather signs in a coastal village in Italy were different from those in a mountain valley in Germany. We have forgotten this intimate connection to our immediate environment. We no longer need to look up to know if we should bring an umbrella. We look at a screen, we have replaced direct observation with abstract data. This has made us safer and our plans more reliable, but it has also made us strangers in our own atmosphere. We live under a sky whose language we no longer speak. How many of these traditional weather signs are actually accurate? And how many are just superstition? If a system of knowledge like folk meteorology produces useful results but is based on a wrong understanding of the causes, does that make it less valid? What subtle environmental cues are we blind to because our technology makes them seem irrelevant? Number 4, did their maps have monsters on them? When we think of a map, we think of a precise, to scale representation of a geographical area, a God's eye view. This is a very modern idea of what a map is for. The medieval map, the Mappa Mundi, had a different purpose. It was not primarily for navigation, it was a tool for understanding the world conceptually, and the heavens were an essential part of that picture. The most famous type of Mappa Mundi was the TO map. It was a simple diagrammatic map of the known world. The O was the encircling ocean. The T inside represented the waterways that divided the 3 known continents, the Mediterranean separating Europe from Africa, the Nile separating Africa from Asia, and the Don River separating Asia from Europe. At the very top, in the east, which is why we still orient maps, was Asia and the Garden of Eden. At the center of the world was Jerusalem. This map was not meant to get you from Paris to Rome. It was meant to show you your place in a Christian-centric world. It was a theological diagram as much as a geographical one. And it was always oriented within a cosmic framework. The winds were often personified, blowing in from the corners. The sun's path, the zodiac, or even Christ and the angels were often depicted around the map, enclosing the world within the divine order of the heavens. But as more practical maps for sailors called portolan charts began to appear in the late Middle Ages, the stars became part of the map in a new way. These charts were incredibly accurate for their time. They were covered in a network of rum lines, lines that radiated from compass roses, showing the bearings for sailing from one port to another. To use these charts effectively, you needed to know your latitude. And as we've seen, latitude was found from the stars, particularly Polaris. So the map on the table was useless. Without the map in the sky, the two were inextricably linked. The Portolan chart represented the horizontal dimension of travel, while the stars provided the vertical dimension, your position between the equator and the pole. This connection between the earthly map and the celestial one also extended to the land. The practice of surveying was being reborn. Using an astrolabe, a surveyor could measure angles to distant landmarks. By combining this with measured ground distances, they could create more accurate maps of estates, towns, and kingdoms. Again, the tool for mapping the heavens was the same tool for mapping the earth. Sky and ground were measured with the same science, and yes, their maps sometimes had monsters. The unexplored regions of the world, particularly in Africa and Asia, were often decorated with illustrations of mythical beasts and strange peoples, stories brought back by travelers or inherited from ancient writers. The famous Hereford Mappamundi from around 1300 is a spectacular example, but these were not warnings of her-be dragons. They were a way of cataloging all of God's creation, even the strange and monstrous parts that lived at the edges of the known world. In a way, these monsters were the terrestrial equivalent of the strange constellations in the sky, a way of populating the unknown with stories. We have forgotten that maps can be more than just navigational aids. They can be pictures of our worldview. Our modern maps, like Google Maps, are incredibly useful, but also culturally sterile. They show roads, borders, and businesses. They do not show the Garden of Eden at the top or Jerusalem at the center. They do not show the heavens that surround us. They show us how to get somewhere, but they do not tell us where we are in a larger, meaningful sense. If we were to make a mappamundi of our own 21st century worldview, what would be at the center? A stock exchange, a data center? What would be at the edges? By creating purely scientific maps, have we lost a tool for thinking about our place in the world? What does your personal mental map of the world look like? Number 3 was the night shift, the most important of all. Our world is built around the sun. We work during the day and sleep at night. Our society largely shuts down after dark. We see the night as a time of rest, of inactivity, of emptiness. For the medieval world, the night was just as busy and important as the day. And the people who worked the night shift, the monks, the watchmen, the sailors, were the keepers of a special kind of knowledge. The monastery was the quintessential 24-hour institution. The monastic life was structured around the liturgy of the hours, a cycle of 8 prayer services spread throughout the day and night. The first service of the day, matins, often took place at 2 or 3 a.m. This meant that for every monastery, someone had to be awake, watching the stars, to know when to ring the bell and wake the others. This religious duty made monks into habitual stargazers. They lived by a celestial clock. They would know the constellations of each season like the back of their hand. Over years and decades, they became expert observers of the night sky's rhythms. It is no surprise that many of the astronomical observations and records from the period come from monasteries. They were, in a sense, a network of informal observatories spread across Europe. The chronicles of monasteries often contain notes about eclipses, comets, and other celestial events, recorded with care alongside the abbe's political and economic news. Sailors were another group who lived by the night. At sea, there is no day off. The ship must be sailed and guarded 24 hours a day. The crew was divided into watches. For those on the night watch, the stars were their constant companions. They were not just a clock and a map, but also a source of entertainment and storytelling. A seasoned sailor could tell stories about every major constellation. This oral tradition was a vital part of life at sea. A young sailor learned the practical science of celestial navigation by listening to the old sailors on the long, dark watches. Then there were the city watchmen. Their job was to patrol the streets at night, looking for fires, thieves, and other troubles. They would call out the hours, their voices a familiar sound in the sleeping city. And how did they know the hour? They looked up. They would use the position of the moon or the circumpolar stars. They were the public timekeepers of the night. Their knowledge of the sky had to be practical and reliable. This constant professional engagement with the night sky is something we have completely lost. For us, stargazing is a hobby. It is something we do for pleasure on a special occasion when we go camping. For them, it was a job. It was a routine. It was an essential part of the infrastructure of their society. This meant their collective familiarity with the sky was immense. Most people, not just the specialists, would have had a much better working knowledge of the sky than we do. A farmer waking before dawn to tend to his animals would know the morning stars. A traveler setting out early would navigate by them. The night was not a blank space between days. It was a different world with its own rules, its own light, and its own time. We are in a very real sense afraid of the dark. We have filled our nights with artificial light, pushing the darkness to the margins. We have forgotten that the night is not an absence of day, but its own presence, a time when a different part of the universe reveals itself. The secret of the night shift is that half of reality is only visible when the sun is gone. What have we lost by becoming a purely diurnal society? By banishing the night, what other things have we banished along with it? Is there a form of knowledge or a way of thinking that is only accessible in the quiet and the dark? Number 2, were their eyes better than ours? This might seem like a strange question. Anatomically, their eyes were the same as ours. But, in a functional sense, they may have been far superior. The secret is not in the hardware of the eye, but in the software of the brain and the environment in which it was used. First, and most importantly, they had no light pollution. We cannot overstate how significant this is. A truly dark sky is not black, it is teeming with light. The combined light of thousands of stars and the Milky Way creates a soft silvery glow. On a clear, moonless night, you can see well enough to walk around without a torch. This is a phenomenon called airglow. The sky itself provides the light. Living under such a sky trains your eyes. The human eye takes about 30 to 45 minutes to become fully dark adapted. In this state, the pupils are wide open and the rods, the photoreceptor cells responsible for night vision, are at their maximum sensitivity. We rarely, if ever, experience full dark adaptation. There is always a streetlight, a phone screen, a glow from a nearby town. Their eyes were constantly practiced in the art of seeing in the dark. This meant they could see things we would require binoculars or a telescope to see. They could see the faint, fuzzy patch of the Andromeda Galaxy. They could see the Beehive Cluster in the constellation Cancer. They could see many more stars in the Pleiades cluster than the 6 or 7 we typically spot. Some ancient observers claimed to see up to 14. They were also more attuned to subtle differences in star color and brightness. Without the glare of artificial lights, the reddish tint of stars like Betelgeuse and Antares, or the bluish-white of Rigel and Vega, would have been much more apparent. They could also more easily notice variable stars, stars that change their brightness over time. The star Algol in the constellation Perseus is a famous example. It dims noticeably for a few hours every 2.87 days. The Arabs called it the demon star, suggesting they were well aware of its strange behavior. Their superior vision was not just about sensitivity, it was about pattern recognition. Their brains were trained from childhood to see the constellations, to connect the dots. We look up and see a random scatter of points. They looked up and saw a familiar landscape of figures and shapes. This ability to see patterns where we see chaos is a skill that comes from long and repeated practice. They also lived at a slower pace. Stargazing takes time and patience. You do not just glance up. You sit and watch for hours. You let your eyes adapt. You notice the slow, majestic rotation of the entire sky. Our modern lives, with their constant distractions and rapid shifts in focus, are not conducive to this kind of slow, patient observation. We have forgotten what our eyes are capable of. We have protected them from the dark, and in doing so, we have weakened them. We see the night sky through a veil of our own making. The secret is that the universe they saw was richer, more detailed, and more colorful than the one we see. Not because the universe has changed, but because we have. If you were to spend a week in a place with a truly dark sky, with no artificial light at all, how would your perception of the world change? Is it possible that our constant exposure to bright artificial light has had other, more subtle effects on our psychology and physiology? What are we not seeing right in front of us simply because our eyes are no longer trained to look? Number 1, what did it feel like to be truly alone with the stars? This is the last secret and perhaps the most important one. It is not about a fact or a technique. It is about an experience that was common to almost every human who lived before the 20th century, and which is now one of the rarest experiences on Earth. The feeling of standing in true silence under a sky of unimaginable brilliance. Try to imagine it. You step out of your small, dark house. There is no hum of a refrigerator, no drone of distant traffic, no glow from a television. The only sounds are the wind, an owl, your own breathing. The air is crisp and clean. When you look up, the sky is not a black ceiling, it is a dome of infinite depth. The stars are not faint, shy sparks. They are sharp, brilliant diamonds, and there are thousands of them. So many that you can barely trace the constellations, And splitting the sky in two is the Milky Way. It is not a faint, ghostly smudge. It is a vast, textured river of light, full of bright patches and dark lanes of dust. It looks so close you could almost touch it. You feel small, not insignificant, but small in a way that is comforting. You are a tiny part of something immense and beautiful. You are not looking at a picture. You are in it. The sky is not above you, it is around you. The dome of stars feels like the walls of a great cathedral, and you are standing in the center. You feel a connection to the past, knowing that your ancestors stood under this same sky. To the universe itself, feeling its scale and its majesty in a direct, physical way. You are not learning about the cosmos from a book or a screen, you are experiencing it. This experience was the foundation for everything else we have talked about. It was the wellspring of their myths, their science, their religion, their art. It was the raw, unfiltered data that fueled their desire to understand. Before the astrolabe, before the Tiamat, before the Zodiac Man, there was a human being standing alone in the dark, looking up in wonder. We have lost this. We have traded silence for noise, darkness for light, and wonder for information. We can see images of distant galaxies from the Hubble telescope, images far more detailed than anything they could have imagined. But we have lost the immediate, personal, and profound experience of our own night sky. The greatest secret of medieval stargazing is not a piece of knowledge, but a feeling of connection, of awe, of being part of a living, breathing cosmos. We may know more about the universe than they ever did, but we feel it far less. We have become spectators of the cosmos, not participants. Can we ever get that feeling back? Is it possible to create pockets of true darkness and silence in our modern world? And if we did, what new myths, what new science, what new ways of being human might emerge from them? What is the most important thing we have forgotten? Perhaps it is simply how to look up.